Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews, and gentle musical meanderings. This week I want to take a look at an album called Ilana the Creator by Mdou Moctar. Now you can look at this album in a couple different ways. In the most traditional kind of classic record store bin sense, you probably could call this a world music album because Mdou is a guitar player, but he's coming from a country called Niger, a landlocked country in the middle of Africa. But also you can kind of take a look at this in terms of it being more of a psychedelic rock guitar album. It fits both of those bills, and probably in a more contemporary, smaller world sense. That's how probably it would be looked at these days. But those two different definitions aren't exclusive to one another. In fact, I think they're intertwined. And the way that they intertwine with each other is what makes this album, I think, so interesting and fascinating. And after you listen to this album, you can kind of decide for yourself what you think about it. I firstly think it's a fantastic album, and I'll tell you why over the course of this study. But I also think that Mdou as a person is a very interesting character, and the place where he's coming from, the place that helped him generate the music that you find on a lot of the Creator, I think is of extreme importance and very fascinating. And the more context you can lay on him, I think the deeper appreciation you can get for his music. Now, if you want to look at Ilana the Creator from the perspective of a world music album, which you can do, a non-Western contemporary music album, there's a lot to unpack there, lots to think about, especially in terms of where Mdou's coming from. Mdou identifies himself as a member of the Tuareg culture group. And this is a traditionally nomadic group that lives right on the edge of the Saharan desert. So like a good chunk of Niger is taken up by the Saharan desert. It's right in the middle of Africa. As African people who are identified as part of the continent of Africa, their music exhibits many of the Pan-African characteristics that you can talk about. Africa is a very big continent with a vast variety of culture groups in it. But despite all these different culture groups in the continent, there are some characteristics of music in Africa that kind of goes across the whole board in differing varying degrees depending on where you're coming from. One of the most identifiable characteristics of African music is polyrhythm, and Mdou's music very clearly is polyrhythmic. It doesn't take you too long listening to the album that you can hear this sort of classic 3/2 relationship, that the feel of that goes throughout the entire album. 3 beats for every 2 beats that's stacked on top of each other. What we would call hemiola. The second one that Mdou's music really exhibits a lot that I think is particularly interesting, and that's a very subtle Persian influence. The influence of Persian music can be felt across Africa, which is a very interesting idea because, Persia is, the classical idea of Persia is this ancient civilization that's set like opposite the ancient Greeks and Romans. And, they were always traditionally the other, and they have a very specific set of musical tropes that go along with that style of music that's been highly influential in a whole vein of music, especially in South Asia. The influence of Persian music can be felt in the music of Iran and in gypsy music, and most obviously in the traditional classical music of India. Both Hindustani and Carnatic styles in India have these elements that can be traced back to Persian music. And the reason that this is so widespread is because of this ancient trade route called the Silk Road. The Silk Road stretched from northeastern China all the way down through India, through Iran, through the Middle East, and down into the northern horn of Africa. And it didn't stop there. It kept kind of drifting across the continent. Of course, this is a very ancient trade route. We really don't have any concrete ideas about how that was spread through the area, but you can kind of see along that route the traces of a lot of cultural exchange, and that cultural exchange manifests itself in different in this musical standards that we now kind of call Persian music. And two of the elements of Persian music, I think, that are very pronounced, that you can see extremely clearly in some of the styles, is this idea of a modality. Now, not tonality. In Western music, we call it tonality because we have tonic and we have a key signature. Modal music describes more like a set of notes, like we would almost like a scale, but it doesn't really work like a scale in most instances. Modal music is sort of this weird combination of like scales and sort of musical ideas, and very often it's set against a drone. You can hear this most clearly again in the traditional music of India, where you have like sitar players, a very clear drone that they play against, and they have the raga that goes on top. The raga is this set of agreed upon scales and musical ideas that they use to improvise on. Now, in Mdou's music, when you listen to his guitar playing, he's got a capo on his guitar, but he's not playing it like you'd normally have a guitar solo. He's employing those open strings an awful lot when he plays, almost at the point where it feels kind of like he's using it as a drone. And his soloing is very much just kind of going across that more like static harmonic environment. It's not a whole lot of harmony going on. Now, you'll listen to his songs and you'll say, but there's sections in there where it sounds like there's chord changes, and there are, because it's not strictly Persian. But what I'm saying is his guitar style, his soloing style, has these roots in this modal style that can be traced back to Persia. And this is a Pan-African style, especially considering, his people are on the southern part of the Sahara Desert. And if you're talking about trade routes that go through Africa, these are going to be some of the first people on the other side of the Sahara Desert that are going to start running into these cultural exchanges, just on the other side of, Egypt and Ethiopia, on the more northwestern side of the continent. So the influence, I think, of Persian music on what Mdou's doing guitar-wise, it really shouldn't be overlooked. It's an important way of listening, and it's one of the things that gives his music a sort of otherish feel, and connects it also to this whole tradition of kind of Middle Eastern sounding music. Middle Eastern music has that commonality between it because of its connections back to the music of Persia along that trade route. This kind of cultural exchange did not stop there. Of course not. I mean, when you get in the middle of Africa, you have all these hundreds of years of mixing around with different things to create specifically this Tuareg style that Mdou's pulling his musical identity from. And in those traditional ways, cultural exchanges happen from person to person, hand to hand, people listening to music along these trade routes and picking up ideas along the way. But those sorts of musical exchanges have never gone away. They've always continued on. And I think it's particularly interesting the way that music is exchanged currently in Niger. Because, the way that we deal with music and technology for ourselves is that a lot of people will stream music. You'll have your handheld device, your computer, or whatever it is, and it streams music from the internet, wherever else. Well, the internet's very sketchy out in the middle of the desert, clearly. But people still use technology to trade music. In this case, there's this very fascinating Bluetooth MP3 exchange that happens in this culture group. People will record things that they hear, like in a live situation, or maybe they'll have studio recordings if a person's got studio time. And then whenever they get with other people, they'll hook their phones up Bluetooth and exchange it person to person still, but now with the use of technology. And this sort of MP3 trade is the environment in which Mdou's music came to prominence. And he became a very popular musician in Niger. Played weddings, which is a pretty high-profile gig in that area. It's probably like the highest-profile gig that you can get, and became part of this MP3 music exchange. Eventually, some of these MP3s made their way to the U.S. into the hands of a gentleman, Chris Kimsey. And Chris Kimsey has a record company called Sahel Sounds that kind of focuses on music of Africa. And he became very fascinated with Mdou through this recording, traveled to Niger and went through this whole search to try to find him. And fascinatingly, that whole story is told in a documentary called A Story of Sahel Sounds, which I've suggested before whenever I was listening to Hama last year. He was another person that I found due to this Sahel Sounds sort of stable of artists. And Chris Kimsey finding Mdou brought him to a much broader audience and also kind of uncovered an artistic side to Mdou that was probably not available to him otherwise. Although Mdou pulls a lot of his influence from his kind of localized traditions, he's also influenced by outside things, one of which would be Prince. He's a big Prince fan. Through his association with Chris Kimsey, adapted Purple Rain, except you can't call it Purple Rain because in Tuareg dialect, there's no direct translation for the word purple. So I believe it's called rain that is blue with a little red in it. That's actually how the name of the movie translates. But it's a very interesting retelling that tells a story of a person who's in a very traditional Muslim community and wants to go out and play music, which in some Muslim circles, more conservative Muslim circles, think that music is not healthy for a person to be involved in. And in addition to Prince, Mdou has several other contemporary guitar players that he cites as references for his style. You know, in addition to his own background, his own specific cultural background as a Tuareg person. Eddie Van Halen loves Eddie Van Halen. He loves Jimi Hendrix, and you can hear these things in his playing. And to put him on the sort of same level as those guys is actually a very interesting proposition because his style is a lot different. It's not the kind of guitar playing that you'll hear every day in our Western ears. But if you approach it with a different kind of listening, I think that you can see him as a guitar hero for a contemporary age, you know? Wondering where all the best guitar players are coming from. Maybe they're coming from the desert. If so, Mdou's a really great example of that style of playing. What's possible with that kind of playing. Granted, the fact that he's coming from a place where the smartest kind of amplifier you can buy is a portable amplifier with a battery in it because you probably aren't going to be able to plug in most places where you go and play. You know, his sound is kind of dictated by those circumstances, but still, his sound is able to capture something extremely evocative about the place that he comes from. You know, I can imagine the horizon of the desert in his music. You know, especially at dusk, it seems to evoke to me that mental picture. He's definitely pulling from a very distinctive background to create something that is novel and fresh and definitely worth listening to. So if you are a fan of guitar music, definitely check out Mdou. He's a person absolutely worth listening to. And at first, again, you may balk a little bit at the different sound that it has, you know, and you could argue to a degree that it's a little bit monochromatic, you know, in the same way that you listen to a salsa album and the salsa style comes up all over the place. This also has that 3-against-2 hemiola lope that pervades the album. So you have to accept that that's just part of the feel of the album, part of the style. And once you can peel back that initial layer, there's a lot to be uncovered on the album and some fascinating emotive guitar playing. Check out Mdou if you get the opportunity. Check out Ilana the Creator. It's one of my favorite albums from this last year. And that's all I got on it for this week. So if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to it. Also, if you're interested, check me out on Spotify. I've got a playlist of the 2020 music, 2020 radio, and I've got a couple of Mdou songs up there. And next week, I'll give you guys a lowdown on some cool music that I'm listening to right now. But until then, I'll catch you on the flip side.
Very fast.
Yeah, I think it's because I don't use this in electric. In the hand, it's natural.
Can you show that technique when you're going to play a fast line? Yeah. See, I can't even, I wouldn't be able to get my finger to move that fast.